using me, but your voice is calling. What heaven brought you and me cannot be forgotten. Around the world again, looking for that woman, girl, who knows love can endure. And you need a wheel. See the Southern Cross for the first time. Understand now why you came this way. It's the truth you might be running from is so small. It's as big as the promise of a coming day. So I'm sailing for tomorrow, my dreams are dying. And my love is an anchor tied with silver chain. I have my ship, all her flags are flying. She is all that I ever left, and music is her name. Think about how many times I have fallen. Spirits are using me, but your voice is calling. What heaven brought you and me cannot be forgotten. Around the world again, looking for that woman, girl, who knows love can endure. And you need a wheel. So we cheated and we lied and we tested and we never failed to fail. It was the easiest thing to do. You will survive, be invested, and somebody fine come along, make me forget about loving you in the Southern Southern Cross. Southern Cross. Southern Cross.
All right, I want to welcome you back, and obviously, happy Hanukkah if you celebrate Hanukkah. I know next week is going to be Christmas, so Merry Christmas for those of you that celebrate that, and Happy New Year for those of you that are going to live until then. Anyway, so I wanted to talk to you today about some stories that are obviously current events. Some of them are less prominent, but I think that we're going to ring in the new year with a lot of turmoil. I think people should be prepared. And I think that if you aren't yet planning for what's going to happen if there's mass unrest, then you're simply not really addressing the ongoing crisis correctly, right? There are people who have been sleepwalking through this whole shit show that we've been living through, and they just think things are going to be okay because they've always been everything's worked itself out, and whatever, God has a plan or whatever, and I don't think that you can depend on other people to just other people, or whether you're talking about human beings or whether you're talking about the Almighty or whatever. You have to plan for what could happen, because there's always only one person who you're responsible for, and that's yourself. And then after that, you're responsible for the people around you, your family, your friends. But on to the real topic for today. You will notice in the description there are a number of links, and I wanted to first get to that. You will see, let me put this display on. This is a link for Odyssey. This is the alternative to the YouTube channel. I will be uploading this stream to Odyssey as fast as I can afterward. Also, whoops, I don't want you to see that page. So BitChute. So what I had on was the BitChute control, like, settings page. So I wanted to show you my account, not the actual settings, because then you'd be like, hey, we could mess around here. But Bold Like a Leopard, or Chef Leopard, whatever you want to call me, it is Chef Leopard on BitChute. And I wanted to tell you that BitChute is currently probably the best place to go for videos. In fact, added a few users in the past few days, and I have to say it's come a long way, and I am happy that BitChute has been just growing and performing better since I started. And I can tell you that a couple years ago, I would have been almost beside myself in disappointment at how it's been, and wanting to stop using it. And now I think it's probably almost to the point of being a great platform. There are some features that you won't be able to find on BitChute that you can find on YouTube. The most important one being live streaming, but I don't use live streaming as much as I used to anyway, so it doesn't bother me. This is the rare live stream for me. And another thing is that I think once they do get live streaming, it'll be a very interesting experience, because I am more confident that BitChute will not suppress notifications like YouTube has. And therefore, if you want to catch a live stream with one of your creators, let's say it's with me, but for whatever reason, like if you like Computing Forever, Dave Cullen, the Irish guy who's very, he's actually a very smart guy, you will probably be able to see it instantly, instead of having to depend on, instead of believing that you're getting screwed. Yeah, you are going to probably be able to see your favorite creators. I have Elron here. Haven't seen you in a while. Welcome back. I hope you're doing well. Know that, despite whatever disagreements we've had, I'm always glad to, have you, watch a channel, read my articles, hear your response. Also, so besides BitChute, I do have a Rumble channel. Rumble, I don't think is a great creator platform yet, but it is improving, and there's more and more Rumble creators all the time. So you should try at least Rumble. I think that the creators that are on there do very well. I wouldn't say that it's great for me yet, but for some reason you are able to grow on there, even though it doesn't really make sense, because your videos are not monetized or visible for a long time. I would say that Rumble, in terms of its usability, is a little bit closer to where BitChute was maybe a year ago, but it'll get better. So we have Ophir and we have Larry here, and I hope that you guys are ready to learn a little bit about the woman who has served as my congresswoman for the past 12 years. and her name is Marcia Fudge. You can see her photo over here. And she is, I would say, probably the quintessential low-performing identity politics um, loser who fails upward. And she is going to fail upward if Joe Biden takes the White House. Now, I know some of you might be holding out hope that that doesn't happen. And I'm operating on the assumption that he does go to the White House because I don't know what's going to, I don't know how it could be otherwise at the moment. It's very difficult to contemplate a way for this to be reversed. So I'm operating under the assumption that Joe Biden is going to be president. And if he is president and she takes office as his Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, let me tell you something. Progressives and liberals should realize that they're going to be putting poor Americans of every race, right? Whether you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Jewish, whatever, you're going to put them in the hands of someone who could care less about the plight of the poor. She has made a whole career about pretending to care about things that she doesn't. And you're going to start having to get used to that if you're one of these people who is on Section 8 or who uses public housing, lives on public housing. And for those of you that don't know yet, I mean, I think it won't come as any surprise to Ophir because I'm sure that he's encountered people who live on public housing in England or in Wales or whatever, wherever he's been in the UK. But public housing is a major mess. It is one of the most easily abused entitlements in the country. And also the people who may be using it are also very easily abused and I would say basically they're being how should I put this? If you're using public housing, if you're living on a housing project, it's essentially being in a prison where you can just leave whenever you want and then come back. You can leave for like, let's say you can find some money to go take a bus or you have a car. You can leave for the day and then you have to come back because you're basically up shit's creek. There's nothing else you can do. You're what I would call a serf. You're a class loser, unfortunately. And I feel for the people who live on public housing because I've certainly read about some of these places. I've only been to, I think, a couple. So excuse me if I'm learning some of this secondhand and have been. But I think if you're living on public housing in the United States, people have to realize that it could be that the same family might be on this public housing for several generations, right? The first housing project opened in, I think it was 1935 in Atlanta. And the more they seem to crop up, the less the problem seems to get solved. People just live on these public properties and they never end up having their issues rectified because they're conditioned. Their families are conditioned to be wards of the state. And it's not something to really joke about, in my opinion. Now, you could, and there have been series that have joked about it. There used to be a cartoon called The PJs. In fact, I think I could find it. I don't think I can play the sound because it will probably be copyrighted by Fox. But yeah, you have to understand that there's entire episodes where there's entire families that have grown up on public housing. This was the PJs. This was in the 90s. They had it was about a superintendent named Thurgood who lived in public housing. I think it was in Chicago or whatever. And it was just basically laughing at the situation of the poorest Americans. And look, it was a funny show, and I'm not going to pretend that I didn't find it funny, but There's people who actually have to live with this type of garbage where the elevator doesn't work. Their elderly parents are cowering in the hallways while these criminals wander through. Their neighbors are criminals. They have all these problems, and who's really going to solve them? Well, there's no incentive to solve them because they don't have any. None of these people have any what do you call it, leverage, right? Once you live in a public housing, they have you. They have you there, and they want to keep you there because that makes their job permanent. The public housing infrastructure, the public housing authorities. So, in summary, they're going to be putting in charge of the Department of Housing and Urban Development a woman who will be overseeing at least the federal aspects of these programs, a woman named Marcia Fudge. And I, having lived in northern Ohio my entire life, apart from 5 years where I lived in Israel, I know a little bit about Marcia Fudge. She's my congresswoman, and I'm sorry to say that because the people who live here, whether you are rich, poor, black, white, whatever, you're getting zero out of Marcia Fudge. You might as well not even have a congresswoman. But we do. And she grew up here. She grew up in Shaker Heights. It's a place that I lived briefly when I was a kid. And she graduated from high school there, and then she went to Ohio State and then got a law degree over at the Cleveland Marshall College of Law, which is the main law school here in the area. It's a public law school, but it does have like a decent reputation. I know several people who have gone there. And she ended up becoming a prosecutor. And the Cleveland prosecutor's office is generally known as a little bit problematic. I wouldn't say it's the worst in the country, but I listed 4 examples. So this article I will put right now in the chat. I don't think I put it in the description because I forgot. What are we doing again? And did I hear a baby in the background? No baby in the background. I hope not. Because I'd probably be screwed if I had to deal with that. In any case, so there were 4 cases that she had to deal with, including the Anthony Michael Green case. Now she started at the department she started at the prosecutor's office, I believe, in 1984, and there have been several people who have been convicted of major crimes, whether it is rape in the case of Anthony Michael Green in 1988. Whether it's murder, also in 1988, Melvin Bonnell, and whether it was a drug-related murder in the case of Anthony Lemons in 1994. So all 3 of these men were falsely convicted by the prosecution, by the public prosecutor, that office in Cleveland that she worked for, and she has never really had to answer for it. Now, I can also let you know it's not necessarily her personal responsibility for that. She was more involved in budgetary issues, but she was in that department. It's a department that if you are a person who's concerned with the rights of the accused, the defendants, and things like that, and that's totally fine with me. I'm not one of the more doctrinaire law and order conservatives. I do believe in giving criminals the right to fair representation, and I'm against convicting people solely based on very spurious evidence. If you're one of these people who is against mass incarceration, is against putting people behind bars for crimes that they didn't commit, which I think goes beyond the liberal conservative divide. I think it's even if you talk about the most law and order person, I don't think that they would admit, oh yeah, I guess, if there's a crime, we got to just put somebody behind bars, doesn't matter who. So Marcia Fudge was involved in the department that has several blemishes to its name. Now, I don't know statistically how bad it is. I don't know how they keep these statistics for the falsely accused, but it is a problem here in northern Ohio that people do get thrown into jail without proper legal representation and railroaded. Okay, now the person that she worked under at the prosecutor's office was Stephanie Tubbs Jones, who became our congresswoman in 1998. Basically, she becomes a congresswoman. Marcia Fudge becomes her chief of staff. And then 2 years later, Marcia Fudge gets elected to be the mayor of Warrensville Heights, which is a suburb over here, a very small and not very rich suburb of Cleveland. And she becomes a politician, and she's riding the coattails of Stephanie Tubbs Jones, who it was, I would say, a little bit more well admired because she just had like a real personality, not like Marcia Fudge. So in any case, Marcia Fudge serves as her chief of staff for one term, goes back to Cleveland, and along with her, working in Tubbs Jones' office, was Lance Mason. Lance Mason was a younger attorney. He was about 11 years younger than Marcia Fudge, and they all were acquainted with each other. Lance Mason and Marcia Fudge working in Stephanie Tubbs Jones' office, and that's a little bit important for later. So both Mason and Fudge went to Washington to work for Stephanie Tubbs Jones, and in 2000 they went back. Tubbs Jones gets she remains in Congress until 2008 when she died suddenly of what I would classify, I think it was a brain hemorrhage. That's what they said. Meanwhile, Fudge is the mayor of Warrensville Heights. Lance Mason serves as a state legislator over in Columbus. He serves as a state legislator in both the House of Representatives, the Ohio House of Representatives, and the state Senate. Then he comes back and he serves as a as a judge of the municipal court of I think it's the Court of Common Pleas here. In any case, so Marcia Fudge, she succeeds to Congress. She becomes the next congresswoman after Tubbs Jones because Jones dies in 2008, only a few months before the 2008 election. And she didn't even have to pass a primary at all because there wasn't any time. And then, this is also important, she doesn't really do anything when she's in Congress. She doesn't really have her name on any major piece of legislation. And I believe the ones that she does have her name on are the renamings of post offices, which is a pretty common theme for some of these politicians who don't really have much to hang their hat on. I think even Hillary Clinton had that issue where she didn't really pass any significant pieces of legislation that she crafted. She basically had a number of post offices renamed in the state of New York. So those are done at the federal level. I guess if you want a post office renamed, you need the U.S. Congress to pass an act in order to do it. Just one post office. It could be in the most isolated part of Kansas, and Congress has to do it apparently. So many of the things that Marcia Fudge has had passed are not really laws. They're resolutions, such as the one to have Representative John Lewis's body lie in state in the rotunda of the Capitol. Now, she's established a reputation as just being someone who votes straight party line with Nancy Pelosi, which means that we in Cleveland, we have a person who not only does she not really represent much of a coherent opinion, she basically just parrots the party line, and she doesn't introduce much work. So she's just a rubber stamp for whatever the Democratic part of the House is doing. So that's really who we've had as our representative. Now, she's going to be in charge of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Before I go on, I do want to mention, this is something I forgot before, you can subscribe to a newsletter that I put together. It's not really that regular lately, but all the articles that I have published, will be on it. So you can subscribe here, and basically it helps you stay abreast of just the stuff that I produce, and whether it's investigative pieces, analytical pieces, maybe some opinion, and also some of the videos, and maybe some of the products that I might be selling through the Etsy store, which I haven't done much with that for the past few weeks, just been very busy. Also have been on the road. In any case, so she's just been a very mediocre person. And in fact, if you're talking about people who have a record in terms of housing, she's not even the most accomplished person in terms of Ohio's delegation to Congress. That would be Joyce Beatty, who's the 3rd District Congresswoman from Columbus. So Joyce Beatty has brought some funds for public housing back from Washington to the Columbus area. You can't say the same about Marcia Fudge. Now, so the big issue I think that people should be concerned about is she's just a person who covers for other politicians, and it's very shocking how she has. So I'm going to let me see here. So here we go. So
world on November 17th, 2018, but her memory is alive and well.
Her care for the students.
Let me start this again. So this is about Aisha Fraser. She was murdered 2 years ago in Shaker Heights, and I'll tell you how it connects to Marcia Fudge.
Aisha Fraser left this world on November 17th, 2018, but her memory is alive and well.
Her care for the students she had while she was here, and the love that she spread through not only her students but also her colleagues.
She leaves a legacy in the Shaker Heights School District where she was a beloved teacher, and a new bill in the Ohio legislature that carries her name could make a big difference in the future. Her ex-husband, a former Cuyahoga County judge, is spending life in prison for her brutal murder. The proposed law would set up a domestic violence victim protection program.
If Aisha had had this access to this sort of continuum, she might still be here.
Introduced earlier this year by Ohio Representative Janine Boyd, the bill would in part require officers to use a program that helps assess the level of danger, including lethal danger, a domestic abuser may pose.
For the victims who are identified through the lethality screening as being in the most danger, the most critical, imminent danger, we can provide a way out, safe way out for them, and save their lives.
Boyd says they're working on finding a source of money that would make her bill work.
We want to make sure our law enforcement are trained and they have a great grasp of the protocol because it'll save lives in their world as well.
Aisha leaves behind 2 daughters who teachers in the district say are being looked after.
Every time a teacher gets a hug from one of those little girls, they are not just thinking about the little girls, they're thinking about Aisha and her love that she had for them.
Boyd credits Aisha's family and other victims of domestic violence for helping draft the bill. She says she has gotten support from the Attorney General.
All right, so that's the story. Aisha Fraser was murdered in 2018, and the person who helped to get her murderer into a position where she could do it is Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, and there's really almost no coverage of this from that angle. So like I said, on November 17th, 2018, school teacher Aisha Fraser was dropping off her 2 daughters with her former sister-in-law at her Shaker Heights property when she was assaulted and stabbed to death. Her assailant then attacked police responding to the incident before being subdued. His identity, while not surprising, was scandalized their community and local media. Lance Mason. This same Lance Mason had left his seat as a state senator in 2008 upon being appointed to a vacant slot as a judge on the Court of Common Pleas for Cuyahoga County by Democratic Governor Ted Strickland. Mason had gone had parlayed his University of Michigan law degree, prosecutorial record, and political connections on what should have been a job for life. Many major county political figures had been rounded up in a massive corruption probe in 2010 surrounding Commissioner Jimmy DeMora and Auditor Frank Russo, meaning only that there was more room for other corrupt local politicians to move up. But in 2014, Mason committed a crime that would dash all of his higher ambitions. As she was exiting a commuter train in Shaker Heights, a woman witnessed an SUV passing on Van Aken Boulevard where a man was viciously assaulting his female passenger. She called the police. The passenger was then thrown from the vehicle, after which she flagged a passing motorist who called 911. Less than a half hour later, the police arrested Mason and confiscated an arsenal of smoke grenades, semi-automatic rifles, a bulletproof vest, and 2,500 rounds of rifle ammunition. It was a bizarre and unexpected end to Mason's political career, but he was forced to step down from the bench and eventually plead to a felonious assault and domestic violence charge. Mason had beaten, choked, and bitten his wife Aisha, with both of their daughters present in the back seat of their car. Aisha Mason's eye socket was broken in the incident. But despite the horrific nature of his crime, Mason was able to receive a light sentence of 2 years in prison. He would eventually serve only 9 months and shockingly was released in June 2016. Disbarred and disgraced, Mason could not serve in any legal capacity anymore, but he quickly found a job at City Hall in Cleveland as a minority business development administrator under Mayor Frank Jackson. After Fraser's death, Jackson would reiterate that while it was a tragic situation, he continues to believe in second chances by hiring ex-cons and felons to work for the city of Cleveland. So let's watch that video of Mayor Jackson.
Frank Jackson stands behind the hiring of Lance Mason, saying he had no way to predict Mason would get arrested for killing his ex-wife, even though he'd been convicted of a brutal attack on her years ago. Cleveland City Hall gave Lance Mason a second chance after getting out of prison for attacking his ex. The mayor calls what happened over the weekend a tragedy, but he told me a short time ago City Hall will continue to hire convicted felons. Will you now say, we're never going to hire anybody else with domestic violence in their background or certain kinds of felonies? How will this affect you going forward?
No, we're not going to say that. We're going to look at it as a policy where our policy is second chance. And we will hire, unless there is something that prohibits us from doing it. Example, anybody who's a convicted felon cannot work around children. You wouldn't hire somebody who's an embezzler and put him in the finance department.
Lance Mason had worked to help recruit minority companies to do business with the city and make it easier for them.
So I wanted to say, this is the mayor of Cleveland, the largest city in Ohio, saying, yeah, I'm going to continue hiring ex-cons, violent ex-cons like Lance Mason, and putting them in positions where they are basically getting paid by the public, even though they committed these heinous acts. So, continuing on, the lenient sentencing of Mason would have gone unnoticed had he not followed up his release by murdering his wife in 2018. He was sentenced in 2019 to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 35 years for Fraser's murder. It was then disclosed who had written letters to County Prosecutor Tim McGinney in 2015 appealing for lighter sentencing in his earlier conviction. Among them was Marcia Fudge, who wrote that the Lance T. Mason I know is a kind, intelligent man and loyal friend. She also said that the behavior he exhibited during the beating was out of character and totally contrary to everything I know about him. This was not the first time that Fudge had written such a request for a fellow politician in legal trouble. In 2013, it was disclosed that she requested lenient sentencing for Representative Jesse Jackson Jr. of Illinois because he was, among other things, the highlight of our karaoke nights. Jackson had pleaded guilty for the misuse of hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign donations for his and his then wife's personal expenses. Fudge's response to the revelation of his letters was to say that, quote, "My heart breaks for Aisha Fraser. I pray for Aisha's family, especially her children, as they attempt to deal with this tragedy." Notice how ridiculous that response is. So the Democrats always say that whenever there's a big shooting, let's say one of these mass shootings like the Parkland massacre, and some of these GOP people say, our thoughts and prayers go out, and they say, enough with your thoughts and prayers, right? Your prayers mean nothing or whatever because you have blood on your hands, because you supported, gun rights, because you oppose more gun control. Well, in this case, this is a woman who literally enabled a person who had already committed a felony, already should have been a felony, did not become a felony because of a lenient plea, and she enabled him. He's a person that was connected to her on a professional level, on a political level, and she got him a much more lenient sentence, apparently using her recommendation. So that's really what we're dealing with here. A woman who she just doesn't feel that she's accountable for things like this. Her only explanation for vouching for Lance Mason was her 30-year working relationship with him, notwithstanding that as a judge and former prosecutor, Mason's crime was especially grave. So those of us that have basic logic in our heads know that if you're a person in a position where you're responsible for disciplining others for infractions, public infractions of the criminal code, people tend to expect that you're held to a little bit of a higher standard, right? And he was not held to a higher standard. In fact, most people, if they were in a much poorer situation and didn't have the connections as Lance Mason, would have probably served much more time than he did, which was in the end 9 months. The weak and compliant local Cleveland media hardly held Fudge to account for this ludicrous association, but some residents were not prepared to let go. In 2019, while at a local public event, she was confronted by a woman who yelled that Fudge bore Aisha Fraser's blood on her hands. After a physical altercation, Fudge sued to have the woman placed under a restraining order, even though the camera footage taken by the woman suggests that Fudge knocked her phone to the ground during the recording. The order was granted despite the fact that there was no evidence that its subject had broken any laws with regards to the incident. In fact, Fudge's explanation was, if I had hit her, she would have been hurt. Fudge's accuser was far from some local nutcase, but had in fact been honored by Mayor Jackson in May 2015 for her work as a filmmaker with a focus on domestic violence. Moreover, the judge's response was bizarre, granting the restraining order by claiming that citizens do not have the right to confront public officials and accuse them of being murderers. So here's the news report.
You slapped me with your back and the phone went flying. You hit me. That's a fact, Congresswoman. That's a fact, okay?
Congresswoman Marcia Fudge is in court seeking a protection order against 45-year-old Marianne Lorien. Representative Fudge told the court she was leaving a public event in January when she was confronted by Lorien about her support for Lance Mason. Mason is the former judge and Cleveland City administrator, now under arrest for the murder of his former wife, Aisha Fraser, following a long history of abuse. Lorien recorded the confrontation on her cell phone and presented it to the judge.
Just be quiet.
The security detail for Marcia Fudge maintains that Marianne Lorien has shown up at a number of her.
So understand this. This is a congresswoman, and she's supposed, she goes around this area with a security detail. What's the reason? I mean, up until now, is this something new? Because generally, I don't think Congress people in their districts are important enough to have a security detail. And that's really, it shows the degree of alienation that they have from average people, right? She has a security detail in order to protect her from people like this woman, Marianne Lorien, who find fault with her conduct. Aisha Fraser, who was actually attacked by her husband, who ended up being murdered by her husband, didn't have that privilege.
Her public events, But Lorian maintains the event in January was the first and only time she met Fudge. Lorian claims the Congresswoman knocked her cell phone out of her hand, which Marcia Fudge denies.
She is just fabricating this entire story. Who hit me, Congresswoman? It is a total fabrication. If I had hit her, she would have been hurt.
Marianne Lorian says her principal complaint is that she believes that Congresswoman Fudge helped Lance Mason get out of prison early and then helped him secure a job with the city of Cleveland.
Other people wrote letter, but it's her. She took a step further. She instructed him to write an apology letter. She instructed him and referred to her as the drama queen wife. Who does that?
During the court hearing, Marcia Fudge responded to Lorian's claim that, quote, you have blood on your hands.
I wrote one letter in addition to the other 35 people who wrote letters on his behalf. Certainly, if I could have seen 4 years in the future, I may not have. But Lance Mason was my friend. I wrote a letter. I looked at the video.
So she keeps saying, oh, if I could have foreseen him doing this again, I wouldn't have written the letter. This is a guy who, look, don't think that we have to pretend that, every single spousal abuse situation is a cookie cutter situation. But in his case, Lance Mason was in his car with his 2 daughters and his wife, and he smashed her head into the dashboard. That's not really like a gray area. Broke her eye socket, right? This is a woman who, I don't know what happened before that, but, that's an egregious crime, what was done to her. And, for Marcia Fudge to try to hedge and say, well, I didn't think he would be able to do something like that again. Well, shouldn't you have been a little bit surprised and at least, withheld your support once you found out that he did it at least one time, that he did it with his kids in the car in a public place, like driving on public street? And I've been on that street. In fact, I go by that street nearly sometimes more than once a day, right? Because it's actually a very central street in Shaker Heights, Van Aken Boulevard. In fact, a video from a week and a half ago, I took on Van Aken, and you can see it in I think my previous video. It's inexcusable. There's no way for me to actually look at this situation and find a way to say that Marcia Fudge acted like someone who had concern for the victim, for Aisha Fraser.
Listen to me. Listen to me.
After listening to both sides, Judge Shirley Strickland Saffold grants Marcia Fudge's request for a protection order against Marianne Lorian.
Just being a public official doesn't give anybody the right to come and approach us in our face, to enter into some type of altercation with us, to follow us out, to call us murderers.
So that's her saying that just because I'm a public official doesn't mean that you can call me names. That's incorrect. The First Amendment specifically says if that's true, then all those protests against President Bush, all those protests against Obama, against Trump, all of those are legally questionable, right? The right to protest is a part of the First Amendment, even if it has nothing to do with something you did. If you have a problem with someone protesting you, you might want to grow a thicker skin or not be involved in politics. I understand that a lot of these people can be irritating, but according to the evidence, it was Fudge who knocked the phone out of this woman's hand. And in any case, I wanted to finish this topic by saying something has to be done. She cannot be the Secretary of HUD. She is a horrible, horrible Congresswoman. It's not a matter of her being someone who does bad things by actually actively doing it. She's just a very passive but also destructive person, because she just votes for legislation based on who her party leaders tell her to. she doesn't deserve to be in Congress, let alone run an agency. And I can tell you that if she were to run HUD, it would be just it would be adding insult to injury for all the people who depend on housing assistance. And I can tell you, I would say not everyone would agree with my stance on public housing. I don't think public housing can continue. It's basically created a whole class of people who are living on the government's dime, but they're living poorly, right? They're not able to get proper nutrition. They're not able to get proper shelter in many cases. It's just wrong. And you can go through some of the video that's out there about NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, and their lead paint situation. You can go through some of the stuff that, Baltimore has some of the most shockingly decrepit housing, I think, in the world for people living on housing projects. But if you are out there in one of these states where there's a senator on this committee, the Senate, I think it's the Senate, one second. The Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Write to your senator. So the senators are Mike Crapo, this is a GOP, Mike Crapo of Idaho, Richard Shelby. I know Larry's in California, so sorry for those of you and Dade's in Iowa. But if you know people in any of these states, so Idaho, Alabama, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Nebraska, Arkansas, South Dakota, Georgia, North Carolina, Louisiana, Arizona, Kansas, North Dakota, Ohio, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Montana, Virginia, Massachusetts, Hawaii, Maryland, Nevada, or Minnesota. Write to your senator, okay? Write to Senator. I included a list of all the senators on the committee. She should not be, and I think if you're a Democrat and you think it's okay for her to be on the committee, then it shows that you just don't believe in anything, right? If you think that because this is a woman who happens to be a black woman and happens to be a congresswoman, and that therefore she should be in charge of housing, even though she's never done anything concerning housing, even though she's actually betrayed the trust of victims of a woman who was black and her husband abused her very seriously and went to prison for it. These are the people that Marcia Fudge has betrayed, and she continues to betray the residents of her district. She will help you if you are politically connected like her, but if you're not, then you can go pound sand. That's really the problem with her. And I would say that with all the problems going on in this country right now, with all the misery, with all of the the tension between the different sides, this is one more thing that I think we should be spared. We should be spared having Marcia Fudge as our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. She is really a disgrace, and I hope that you can help me prevent her from being nominated. It's really just an insult to the people who benefit from it, from public housing. And I use the word benefit very loosely, because I think if you're on public housing, it's basically just a subscription to misery. One more topic I wanted to discuss. There's this guy wrote a op-ed for Newsweek saying it's time to split up the GOP, and he says that, well, yeah, we need to split it up because Donald Trump ruined the GOP in his opinion. He says Republicans I used to respect, like Rob Portman and Lindsey Graham, are only encouraging Donald Trump in his fantasies and threats. Trying to bring the Republican Party to its senses is futile. Its elected officials are more scared of Trump than they are attached to American ideals, and that won't change over the next 4 years and probably beyond. So instead of trying to fix the Republican Party, the heirs of Lincoln should start a new one. It should be rooted in the ideals of free minds, free markets, and respect for individuals. Its foundation must be a healthy understanding of what has made this country exceptional, a patriotism that embraces new blood and engages the world. But that's not all. In contrast to the current Republican Party, the new one has to be built on honesty, social duty, and the norms that conservatives are supposed to venerate. The new party must insist that officials place the public interests above their own and respect the law and consider seriously the views of others. For that reason, I'd call it the Integrity Party, the Tegrity Party, Tegrity Weed. I hope some of you are South Park fans. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. Basically, the guy is a huge blowhard. His name is James K. Glassman. He served as Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs for President Bush. The idea that someone who served under President Bush will lecture anyone else on integrity is ridiculous. But I do want to say this. If he wants to dismantle the Republican Party, I'm all for it. We've seen in the past few weeks just how pathetic the party is. You have a lot of these losers who they would have never been able to accomplish anything suddenly say, well, look, it's time to move on, and we'll have Joe Biden as president. And I guess we'll just go back to business as usual. We'll go back to the way we were under Obama, constantly complaining about Obama and saying Obama bad, and we need to do something about Obama. And then once Trump came into office, they started to pretend that, oh, Obama not so bad, right? They pretended that Obama hadn't wrecked health insurance for millions of Americans through Obamacare. They pretended that Obama hadn't abused the Fourth Amendment through the FISA courts and through NSA data collection. They pretended that Obama hadn't initiated more wars than he'd ended. They pretended that Obama hadn't attempted to violate the Second Amendment through more regulation and more attempts to introduce initiatives to grab guns. They pretended that Obama wasn't some sort of abortion extremist, pro-choice radical. One of these people who basically doesn't think that any child within the womb has any rights. Doesn't matter how long they've been in the womb and how ripe they are to be born. President Obama and his administration, they were, I would say, during his tenure, a lot of these Republicans were constantly getting up on a soapbox and saying, especially people like Lindsey Graham, especially people like Mitch McConnell, and they would thump the lectern and say, hey, we can't stand for this. I remember John Boehner, especially, he got up and said, hell no, we won't, and all those things. And that's really the problem with having that party. It's that they're good at being angry, and they're also good at channeling that anger into nothing, right? They're almost, it's the same principle as Marcia Fudge. She'll come up to the lectern and say all these glorious things about diversity and the community, and we have to do these initiatives and invest in the community and things like that. And in reality, she doesn't do shit. She doesn't do anything for her constituents. She doesn't do, and I'm not trying to tell people that they should agree with me, but they can't even get their own goals done. So I would say, yeah, you do have to dismantle the Republican Party. And I can tell you, as someone living in a red state, that if the Republican Party wants to throw out the people who supported Donald Trump, then they would probably fold within a couple years in Ohio. They're not very popular over here. All these people who were saying, oh, Trump is bringing the party down in Ohio. He won the best victories of any candidate in Ohio history. Let me explain it this way. The last person to win victories by margins as large as Donald Trump was Ronald Reagan, right? And Ronald Reagan won in major landslides in 1980 and 1984. I believe Bush Sr. also won by a major margin in 1988 here in Ohio. So Donald Trump is basically, in my state, he's brought the Republican Party to heights that were not seen since the 80s, right? So this notion that he destroyed the party here is transparently wrong. Now, when you see what's really wrong with the party that these people are talking about, oh, we have to get rid of him, we have to, he's ruining everything, he's ruining the party that we loved. The party that these losers like, the Rhino Party, and we call them sometimes rhinos. It's a very popular term here in the U.S. I know Ophir is watching from overseas. Rhino stands for Republican in name only. But the truth is that, no, that is the Republican Party. The Republican Party has been filled with these absolute morons for so many years that people don't want to be a part of the party, right? People don't want to be part of an organization that just constantly backs down. They never really pursue their goals. They've abandoned the education system to hardcore radicals, right? That's why you're seeing radical sexual education. That's why you're seeing the 1619 Project being imposed in public schools. That's why you're seeing, in some cases, these women who get pregnant, these girls who get pregnant, and they don't have to inform their parents before getting an abortion. I have a question from the audience. What are the alternatives to replace public housing? Well, the idea that I'm trying to talk about, and it's not going to be, I don't think it's an easy idea to sell, and I don't think the idea will ever, it's hard to say when the time will come. But the alternative is that you would basically tell the people who are wards of the state, who live on public housing, and who don't have disabilities, because obviously there are people who, they might live there because they're old or infirm. I think that's a separate issue. But the people who are able-bodied have to be basically told, look, we can put you on a program where you can buy a lot, right? We will try to set you up with a small piece of real estate or a small portion of a building, and you will rent to own from the government, and we will phase out the government's role in it. And instead, you will end up being a shareholder in sort of a company that would manage the property for you. And eventually, if you want to transfer that property, you would be able to, but you would have to forfeit your right to public housing in perpetuity, right? And the idea is that these public housing projects, unfortunately, when something belongs to everyone, it belongs to no one. So you can actually see that there are, there are properties where you have these people who are living there, and they can't fix anything because they don't own it, right? I guess they could try, right? They could run over to Home Depot and get some, get a new gas spring if they have, a screen door that's not working or something. They could do it, but that's not what you do. If you don't own the building, then you're not going to be trying to maintain it. And that's the principle of renting property, right? So that's why they fall into disrepair, because the the people who live there, they have to depend on the government and the housing authority in order to repair those properties. Those workers are in many cases not exactly of great character, and the people who run the properties are in many cases, they're just not even trying, right? That's why the lead mitigation went so poorly in the New York City Housing Authority. That's why, for many years after it had been discovered that this was a major problem, there were children living in these houses and apartments that were exposed to lead paint and other lead-based implements. So, or contaminants that were in the building. So this notion that we have to accept it because yes, these people are very poor and they need to be taken care of. That's not the way that you solve the problem, because if public housing was meant to get people back on their feet, you wouldn't have people growing up in the same housing project or the same or housing projects that were built on top of housing projects where either their parents or grandparents were already living. So the alternative, in my opinion, is to start phasing it out and telling the people who already live there that, yeah, we're going to have to try to move this to be either your responsibility or the responsibility of a company that you actually own an equity share in it. And that's my opinion on a possible fix to public housing. It would be a very tough sell, because then you would have all these people trying to say, oh, you're trying to privatize it, you're trying to make it dependent on the market, you're trying to do... Look, the way it is right now, you're basically telling these people that they are, you know, they're living in kennels, and it's not easy to, you know, dance around that issue if you look at public housing with open eyes. If you walk through parts of New York City, I was actually in a part of New York City where I think it was East New York, okay? New Lots Avenue. I think that's in, let me see here. I'll look it up. So it's considered one of the worst parts of the city, and I was actually walking through it. And I was like, yeah, this is like basically the image of a decaying metropolis, right? So yeah, let's watch a little bit of this video. I mean, you're not really going to be entertained here. Excuse me. So this was 6 years ago. It's been significantly worse than today. So yeah, Ida, this is the type of stuff that you will see as you go through the city. You just see these massive blocks, and you know, inside you, like, the elevators won't work. You have, in some cases, there's open air drug dealing. Now this was in 2014. When I visited, like, I think 3 months ago, yeah, you could see people basically sitting there and talking about what, you know, they would openly talk about either the basketball game or what they were selling, and you could guess what they were selling. So, you know, and it's not as if we only have that in New York City. You know, over here in Ohio, we have plenty of that. In fact, I cited sources that said that we have 50,000 residents of Cleveland that are using public housing, and I believe 10,000 residents of Akron, right? So those are the two big cities in Marcia Fudge's district. So those are big issues that I think people have to really think about in a bigger context. And Marcia Fudge doesn't care about that. I'm not going to say that she couldn't understand it, because I'm sure that she understands that it can't work. I just don't think she cares. Just like she didn't care about Lance Mason's ex-wife. But yeah, so back to the last topic, and we're not going to be going too long from this moment. It's already been an hour. But yeah, the Republican Party, if it wants to split up, assuming that Joe Biden gets into office, which I don't think it's going to be a very painful period for most of us that are of my persuasion. People who believe in liberty, transparency, ending wars overseas, and reducing the defense budget, restoring civil liberties, and the right to privacy and all of that. It's going to be a very difficult tenure under Joe Biden / Kamala Harris. But the Republican Party, it can't just continue to say, well, we're going to be the people who hold up all the changes under the Democrats, because they're not even doing that. In many cases, they just allow the Democrats to walk over them. They're doing it with this election. They did it in 2018, by the way. I believe that many of the Republicans who were in office before Trump came into power, they saw him come in. He was saying, look, we're going to actually try to do some things. We're going to try to fulfill some parts of our platform in terms of, creating jobs, in terms of fighting foreign interference from China and Chinese influence on the economy, in terms of building the wall, in terms of the wall on the southern border with Mexico, renegotiating NAFTA. All of those things that Trump was saying, well, we're going to try to do those things and not try to just kick the can down the road and pretend that everything is the Democrats' fault and that we're going to use these as election issues. And many of those people said, I thought that we were just going to pretend to do things and not actually do anything. And many of them jumped ship. People like Paul Ryan, they say, well, we're not going to run for Congress anymore. We're not going to actually try to help you do any of these things because we don't have any interest in getting anything done, because we don't actually care. And that's why the Republicans did poorly in the midterms. It's because you had, on the one hand, a person in Donald Trump who did want to change some things. Not going to say that he did everything good. And increasing the defense budget, in my opinion, was also the wrong thing. I think he should have just shifted the money around and focused some of it on more important things and withdrawn troops from many of these places. But what can I say? He did get some things accomplished, including eliminating the individual mandate and building large portions of the border wall. The Republican Party did such a piss poor job of supporting him, and yet think of all the great things that he did for them, right? He was able to essentially eliminate much of Obama's legislative legacy. He was able to remake the federal judiciary, as if it matters at this point, because you can see that they're not really trying to address this egregious illegal play in terms of the election, in terms of how these voter ID laws were, these voting, these electoral laws were changed before the election in order to facilitate more difficult identification of voters, in order to facilitate more late voting, more late mail-in voting, in order to eliminate signature verification, in order to basically make the election much less secure. And these judges don't really care, and they're not trying to actually uphold the law and address the other illegal issues that have arisen, such as voters that are out of state, voters that are, in some cases dead voters, in some cases voters that were felons, if I remember happening in Nevada. They don't want to address it, and therefore there's a reason that I think people have given up on the Republican Party. They're not really about fighting the battles. They're about talking the trash, and that's about it. That's one of the reasons I think that I'm all for what this guy is saying. If he wants people who want to actually change America for the better, if he wants them to leave the Republican Party, I say they should leave. They should form a different party. And instead of calling it the Integrity Party, it would be called the Action Party. It would be called the Party of, the Party of Resolve. Something that talks about actually going and accomplishing goals, right? Now, I'm not exactly a marketing major, but there's many different ways to inspire people to join a movement, right? There's already a number of movements that have sprung up entirely thanks to the Trump candidacy. Even if you don't like Donald Trump, you have to acknowledge it. There's the Walk Away movement. There's the Stop the Steal movement. There's Blexit. There are some of the more far to the right groups, right? And I'm not saying that I agree with them, but you have people like these America Firsters, the Proud Boys. You do have the Groypers, who I've met a couple of them, more online, but those are new movements. Those are movements that are entirely a result of the culture that he created with his 2016 run. And do you think that the Republican Party, the old establishment Republican Party, has much to offer? They're falling apart. They're made up mostly of middle-aged people who complain about how they can't focus on their stock portfolio because there's all these other important things that are going on. That's really the problem with the Republican Party. And yeah, I think that it is time, if nothing can be done to address the cheating and the infractions that have occurred as a result of this election, it is time to break it up. And yeah, I have to agree with that. And I hope that you agree too. And unfortunately, I think it could be a very painful process, just like everything else that's going on in the country. So that's about it for today. Please like, share, and subscribe. I want to remember to invite you to subscribe to Razor Sharp. What did I call it? The Razor Sharp News Chronicles. I also have this Odyssey channel, right? And BitChute, which is growing, right? So continue to subscribe to me on BitChute. Let me just reload it. Here we go. You also have my Rumble channel. And by the way, so I'm also probably going to have soon a Daily Motion channel. I think I did put a link out, but, or no, I did not put a link in the description because it's not ready yet. And I am also streaming now on VK.com if you guys ever used it. And I know it might be a little strange. Why are you on VK.com? Why not? Who cares? VK, we have a lot of friends over there in Russia, right? So VK.com is basically the Russian Facebook. So I'm using that. And I'm also using Twitch, which I personally have never really liked, but you can watch me on Twitch if you want. So that's about it for today. And take it easy. And have a happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas next week if you celebrate it, and a Happy New Year.
So I'm sailing for tomorrow, my dreams are dying. And my love is an anchor tied with silver chain. I have my ship, all her flags are flying. She is all that I have left, and music is her name. Think about how many times I have fallen. Spirits are using me, but your voice is calling. What heaven brought you and me cannot be forgotten. Around the world, again, looking for that woman, girl, who knows love can endure. So we cheated and we lied and we tested and we never failed to fail. It was the easiest thing to do. You will survive being bested and somebody to find. Come along, make me forget about loving you in the southern.